You've been lied to about money your entire life, but these 5 so-called truths are what's holding you back from being wealthy. So today we're going to chat about all the things people have been lied to about money.
Yeah, there's so many. Actually, I know we're just doing 5, but there's actually a whole list.
I know. Well, it's interesting because, you're taught when you're younger, you just get a job, you work hard, you save money, and then you buy a house, and then you retire, and you're
But
good
I'll
to go.
tell you what, as somebody who grew up like that, it actually made sense. And I know, like, I'm going to go back to 1971 when the dollar decoupled from gold, when Nixon broke the Bretton Woods. And the reason I go back to that is because my parents, when they were raising me, it actually made sense. And now when the dollar, became fiat currency and we could print the heck out of it, the rules changed.
It
And
did.
so when my parents were saying that, it was true.
But even when my parents were, because, I think about it, my dad just worked, we bought a house, we sold a house, we bought another house, and now my parents' house is paid off and they're retired and it's fine.
Yeah, and I actually think there's a bigger issue here, and that is there is no financial education in school at all.
Uh-huh.
This has been our biggest frustration, as you know, and this is why I got my kids hooked on the cash flow game, the rich dad cash flow game. This is why, I was trying to teach them how to barter and entrepreneurship and all the stuff when they were young. Most people, they get out of school, and what they do is they do just get a job, and they turn their money over to Wall Street. That is the model. That's the model everybody wants.
But that's what their parents did, and it worked for a lot of their parents.
It did, and I will tell you why. Because of inflation. So my belief is like the story of I've told this before where my dad bought that $10,000 insurance policy in the 60s, and he also bought a house that was $10,800 during the same time frame, right? And so today that house is worth somewhere around $700,000, and that insurance policy is $10,000. Because when my dad passed, we had to pull that out, and the insurance policy was $10,000. So I was like, what? And so it wasn't adjusted for inflation. But at the time, this is an important piece. At the time, think about that. Go back to that period of time when my dad's sitting there buying that policy. That policy was equal to a house. And that's the important thing to understand.
Right. It would be like getting a $600,000, $700,000 policy today.
Right. And so back then, it made complete sense to him. And that's the issue, I think, right? Because if my dad would have said, I want an inflation-adjusted insurance policy, and just been able to ask that and understand what that meant, then it would be fine, right? But what's happened is and by the way, the only reason I can make this story is because my mom still owns the home.
Right.
This is the home I grew up in. My parents never actually moved once. The home I was born in was the home that my mom still has today. Ironically, that's just not very common today, but it is a fact. And so now the rent from that home, because my mom fell and hurt herself during when she was walking up in the middle of the night, she broke her hip and all this stuff. And but so we rented her house, so it's still her home. But now that rent pays for whatever she's doing now, right?
Yep.
So right now she's in an assisted home. And I think, and that is there's so many lessons in that story, right? And I just think that, school doesn't teach enough, and people don't actually seek out anything about money. Somehow, some way, they think just turning it over to other people is the key.
Well, because they think those people are smarter than they are. And that, I think, is why.
Yeah, but if they really got it and they really understood that most of the financial services sector, wealth management, is salespeople.
Right.
Most of the insurance industry is salespeople. You start to look at the financial products that are sitting out there, the retirement plans and all that stuff. Most of it is salespeople making commissions. And I'm not saying that some of these people don't know a little bit, because they do. And they're trained, and there's people pitching the products and their companies and all this stuff. So I get it. But a lot, if there's a sales component on trying to get people's money, then you have to you have to question it. It's like you know how like when you go into like a Best Buy or a Staples or a Target or whatever, like like in Target, the people aren't making commissions if you're buying a flat screen TV, right?
Right.
They're leaving you alone.
Yeah.
Okay, if you go into another store and they get commission, it's a very different experience.
Right.
Okay, so it's the same thing with financial products. The whole industry is geared toward, I would call Main Street, to try to make commissions. And that's okay. It's not, it just is what it is, but you just need to understand it. You need to understand that they may or may not be putting you in the best thing. It's basically the product of the moment with potentially the highest commission for them.
Well, I told you used to work with a guy named Gary at the bank, and he was the financial planner of the bank in Ohio, and he straight up told me that he puts people in what he gets the best commission.
Yeah.
Like, we were having, because I said, "Gary, how do you know what to put people in?" Because I didn't have he goes, "I just put people in where I get the best
That's
commission."
yeah. And that, by the way, that's common. It's car dealerships are that way, like, whether you're buying electronics, and even in your business, in the real
Yep.
estate, single family home same thing, right?
Yep.
Like if this is what people don't understand. Like even in the position I'm in, the last thing I'm gonna do is clip the listing broker from a commission that they could make. Because if I go, let's say from 3%, which is normal, to 2.5 or 3, or I'm sorry, or 2 or 1 or even 1, they're going to spend less time on it. They're going to, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or even on the sales side. So
Yep.
as everybody's like, I gladly pay brokers commissions and I don't negotiate them because I'm like, listen, I want you to work hard for me, right? Especially on the buying side. So, you know, as people make money on other people through selling products and services, they just need to know that the financial motivation is always going to be like what you just said.
Well, and that's why you always have to be discerning, whether you're working with a real estate agent or you're investing with a brokerage or whatever it is that, you have to always decide what's in your best interest. You can't rely on somebody making commission. And I do have to laugh because, my stepson Kyle, he's 27 years old. His friends are in financial services. They're selling some of these
Yeah.
products, right? And I have to laugh because it's like they don't even have any money to invest yet, So what do they know,
They're
right?
commission
And
sales.
they're just commission, and what they are, they're just commission salespeople that are very good at selling things.
Well, that's what they teach them. And by the way, I have zero issue with a young person trying to figure out how to sell something better.
No.
Right? You have to sell yourself in this life specifically. You have to sell yourself to get a job. You have to sell yourself, to get in a relationship. You got to sell yourself all over the place. So those skills are great. But in this particular case, my son, his friends, they're not in control at all of what they're selling.
Yeah, they
They,
don't
they're
really.
given a menu,
Well,
and they're saying, you sell this, you sell life insurance, you sell these retirement products, you sell whatever you sell.
yeah, absolutely, and they're just trying to, pay their rent and get on,
Yeah.
meet their sales
You
quotas,
cannot
and
blame them.
and then there's always honest brokers in the game too. Like, there's always honest real estate agents that are gonna talk you into the right thing. There's always honest, money managers that really put their clients and diversify them, but I would say as a majority, they're out for their commission, so you just have to understand that.
But I actually now, as you know, I have some extremely good friends in this business. And I had a long chat with Jeff yesterday, right? That guy is as honest as can be, right?
Mhm.
He's built a business based on putting people in the right products. Now, there is a space for insurance products and estate planning and trusts and all that stuff. And there's a massive strategy around all of this. But you do have to understand that there's a menu, especially with these young kids. They don't know.
Mhm.
They're looking at their commissions just like you guys would, right? It's not a flawed system.
But it's not just young kids. I mean, Gary at the bank was probably a rough 45. He
Yeah.
could have been 50, but, I mean,
He probably had a rough
so you
to get up to 45 and selling products like that at a bank. I can only imagine what it's prior 20 years worth.
But you have to, really assess the person that you're working with, like, their knowledge. Like, one of the questions I would ask somebody if I was gonna invest money with them is, like, "Who do you follow on YouTube? What are you reading?" You know, if they just look at you with a blank stare, then it's probably not great.
Well, it's funny, like, as you guys all figure out ways to, what I would call, legally put money into products, tax efficient products, whatever it is. And so I had a fair amount of money sitting at Wells Fargo. I still do, actually. It's somewhere, I guess, three or 400 grand sitting in a Wells Fargo account. It's been there for so long. And it's just over the years, just slowly put stuff away, as you do. As my CPA says, put your money into these kinds of things because, it's going to reduce your taxable income. So I've done that. So I just kept it all in either gold or silver ETFs, even though I'm not a huge ETF guy, like, you know what I mean? But, it was a product that I could buy, GLD or SLV. So I did. And they would call it once a year, of course, just like they always do, all like clockwork. Oh, this is a guy on the list. Called me and they're like, I think you should be investing in, this and that and this and that. And I'd be like, okay, why? And then they melt down. Like, you know what I mean? They don't know why. I go, okay, it's, XYZ mutual fund or XYZ opportunity fund or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I get it. So what companies are in that? Like, why would you, and so again, I'm just scratching the surface and I'm not trying to dupe this person at all. I'm actually interested. Why? Well, there's just not really even answers. Like, they don't know. Like, and then these financial products a lot of times are so complex. They lump everything, they basically kitchen sink it, right? They dump everything in there. And there is a case for diversification. But at the end of the day, guys, what pays people? The actual asset itself that produces. That's it, right? So all those things have to produce in order for somebody to get some money at the end of the day. And so over all those years, I've grown to anticipate and expect that phone call. I love it because it's always a new person with the same title and the same script.
Mhm.
And so for years, I just kind of kept it there as like a toy. I just like, okay, this could be an interesting conversation. And every year, because they make money when something sells, when there's something transacts, when something moves, when, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, I'm playing the long game, as you guys know. Even though I hate being in an ETF, as you guys know, I love physical gold and I love physical silver, and I have a bunch of it. But I figured this, I do believe that with the dollar being a fiat currency and it being everyone being able to print, that more currency, the dollar will continue to devalue over time, and hard assets like gold and silver will continue to rise. And by the way, that's just me. Maybe it's oil, maybe it's water, maybe it's timber, maybe it's dirt, ground. I don't know. What the point is it's not a mutual fund with heavy fees and loads, right? And so I think that, but again, it took me a long time. And for those of you who might be, nodding your head or just scratching your head, perhaps, when I got out of college, this guy out of Seattle came banging on my door. I just got this job. I was really happy. I had, I don't know, 3-4 grand in the bank. And he comes and meets, right? It's a wealth management guy. I gave him 2 grand, which was half of what I had saved up to that point. And, and then every year he'd bang away, try to get more and more and more and more. But I was trying to save up for real estate at the time. And I just kept it kind of the same. Well, 10 years later, it was like 2 grand or something. Like it just was flat. And of course, I was not a big client by any stretch of the means. But that is kind of the point. There's a tremendous amount of fees between where the money's made and me.
Mhm.
And a lot of people in the middle, like a whole bunch of middle people. And that is just the way it is. And I think people just need to realize that, if you don't realize that you are the pawn in this game, you are the one making the money and you are the target. You are the target for the insurance industry. You are the target for the retirement industry. You are the target for the realtor industry. You're the target for everything. You when you're making money at a job, you're the target. You're the target for the credit card companies. You're the target for the student loan business. I'll call it a business. You are the consumer. They want your money.
I have a something I do with before I was a realtor, something I would do when I'm finding a realtor, and you could use this in a lot of different ways, but when I know something's a bad investment, I would run it by them, and I would
Ooh,
see what did they say, right?
like
Like,
what?
I know this is a bad investment, but I'd say, "Oh, I'm interested in this, cash flow, what do you think?" And if they said, "This is great, yeah, let's do it," or "Let's go check it out," or, then I know that they're just full of it and they're just trying to make a quick sale. But if they go, they're never gonna tell you no, but, you might wanna look around a little more, we can look at it, but let's look at some other stuff. Then I know they have my best interest, and I think you could do that in other things too, if you knew a bad investment and you ran it by your money manager and kinda just get a feel for what they're saying, right?
Yeah, but I will tell you, by the way, I do love that strategy. But let's just take a look at what just happened in the last few years, right? As you know, I stopped buying. A lot of people didn't. They kept buying. And so who got pissed off? Everyone. They're like, my whole investor list. Not my whole investor list, but a lot of them. They're like, well, I'm going to go buy with this person, right? I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. So, like right now, we just did a live earlier about the Crash Bros. It's crashing. It's crashing. It's crashing. It's crashing. That gets a lot of clicks and grows people's channels. And so we talked about that today, where we don't really believe that real estate's crashing. But guess what? We got a lot of negative comments today on our live.
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, well, like one guy's like, how can we have a supply shortage when we have a housing affordability issue? And I'm like, it's the same thing. When you have a shortage, you actually have a affordability problem. That's what a definition of a shortage is. So the point is people draw an opinion based on their own individual bias. And that doesn't change.
Yeah. Yeah, because they don't always know, what
Right.
they're looking at.
So I think, one of the things that, before we go into these 5 lies, you really need to approach this from a 30,000-foot view, from a point to where we might have some kind of insight here. You know, Instead of you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, because a lot of people do that. And so you have a bias, and there was a time where I had to unlearn and then relearn. And this is a time where you should consider unlearning things that you heard in school, things that you heard from your parents, whatever it might be that created the software in your brain. That these things that we're talking about are facts. They are not opinions. This is actually happening. And so you have to look at it from that standpoint. Like, okay, instead of just saying that's not true, maybe you should dig a little deeper into this topic and fact check us, because and so I would just encourage you all to take a look at these. And the very first one, which is the biggest one, which is your house is an asset. I love this one because everybody believes real estate is an asset. Well, okay, now let's look at it from a purely factual, logical standpoint. Whose asset really is it? It's the bank's.
Mhm.
Period. If you have a mortgage on it, it's the bank's. Now, you might have some equity in it, right? Or it might be paid off, okay? At that point, it moves to you. Totally get that. But for the overwhelming majority of people, your house is not an asset, because an asset by definition is something that puts money in your pocket,
Right.
not take something out of it.
Right.
If you take that house and you rent it, like my mom did, it's now an asset for her. She
Right.
gets over $3,000, $4,000 a month. in actual passive income.
But when she was living in it, it was not.
Correct, right?
Even though it had appreciated from 10 grand to 700 and some grand, it still was not an
No,
asset.
technically on a balance sheet, right? So because the equity, think about it, guys. Like equity can go poof. It just did, right? For a lot of multifamily and a lot of office buildings, and for a lot of people that own single family, you might have a lot of equity, right? But you guys all know, unless you actually cash out, it's not yours. It's a myth, and it's an illusion at the moment. And so, so that your house is an asset is the lie number one. And I think that as you guys know, with property taxes, maintenance, insurance, and all the things it's an expense to you. But if you cover it with some income, then of course it moves to a real asset.
But then when people say, okay, so my house is not an asset, so I shouldn't own one. No, your house is still a wealth building device. It's just not an asset. So, when you get into a 30-year mortgage and it doesn't change for 30 years and rents go up and payments go up and your salary goes up and you still have this set mortgage payment, that helps you build wealth in other
For sure.
things.
For sure. I remember like way back when I built my first big house. I got a 2.85% construction to perm mortgage from a bank, and built this house. It was in the millions, and I'm like, my payment was a lot at the time, right? Even at 2.8, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, am I gonna be able to do this? Now I look back at that, because I'm not a guy that jumps around, so I owned that house for 15 years. Then I started to take a look at that payment. I'm like, holy moly, like that's lower than rent, right? And it's not because I'm this great real estate investor. It's because what I did is it's like a put. I got into the game, and I have a fixed mortgage, and that fixed mortgage is is I know what my payment's been the same for I don't know 15, 20 years, and I barely owe anything on it. Actually, I just paid it off because I'm actually getting ready to sell it. But the interesting thing is, so now I own that thing free and clear. Obviously at this point, still own it, and but the reality is that I still had that same low payment forever.
Well, but then that allows you to put money into other things. So that's, I think, where the miss is with maybe some of the younger Gen Z that say they don't ever want a house. It's like, okay, but you will then, rent and housing is your biggest cost typically on your balance sheet monthly. So if you are having to go with rents that are going to keep inflating, then that's just going to not allow you to put other things towards something else to invest in. So I do think that, you have to be honest with yourself on the fact that while it's not an asset, it is a wealth builder.
Well,
So
that's
it's not
what-
pointless.
That's why I like the line number 2, which is working and saving money will make you wealthy. So that really plays right into what you're talking about. So we're taught as kids, get a job, save money, retire safe, right? Well, cash in a savings account does lose money as we have inflation.
Yeah.
Like you guys just need to know that, right? Like if you had $100,000 in cash 10 years ago, it buys you so much less.
Well, even from 2019, I was looking. So 20 grand in 2019 is only worth 15 grand today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
okay.
that's a
Let's talk about that.
25%.
That's 6 years.
Yeah.
So 20,000 is basically worth 15,600, right? That's in 5 to 6 years, guys. The same 20 grand, right?
Yeah, the same 20 grand. It was sitting there. It could have bought you 20 grand and whatever now buys you,
Right.
a little over 15 grand.
So, Reagan actually had a great quote around inflation, but inflation quietly destroys savers. That's what it does. And so, by the way, I'm a huge proponent to have reserve cash and savings. So I want to make that clear. You do need reserves. You do need that like safety net. So it's not that I don't have any, but you just need to understand that having it costs you, right? It's a cost to have that insurance policy, but it costs you, and so, wealth comes from, owning appreciating and income producing assets. And it has been and it always will be. That could be art, it could be gold, it could be real estate.
But I think you do need to look at actually like, so if you sat in $20,000 cash, which a lot of you did from 2019 to now, it's now worth $15,600. Okay. If you invested that in gold, it would have increased by 170%, crypto, 2,700%, real estate, 62%, and stocks, it would have doubled, right? So not only did you lose that 20 some percent in purchasing power, if you would have invested it in, assets, you could have over doubled your money.
Right. So that's the thing, guys. So if you're sitting there in cash and you don't know what to do with it, that's fair. That's where everyone starts. Okay. But it's really on you to understand that, especially who knows what's going to happen with all the tariffs and the Trump stuff that's going on right now. We don't know. Okay. But so look backwards. Just take a look backwards and look what the dollar has done. The dollar's slowly eroded. I was looking at, I was talking to Larry Lepard, who, as you guys know, I talk a lot about that book. Jerry, what's the name of that? Oh, The Big Print. The Larry Lepard, who wrote the book called The Big Print. And the Big Print basically tracks inflation and money printing, which is the point of the book, as it relates to the devaluing of the dollar and the rise of other assets. It's an incredible book. I would highly recommend that you read it. And all it does is really just goes back factually and looks at what happened for all the different things that we've needed over the years as a country, and how we've paid for it. And so at the expense of savers. And so if you just get on the right side of the savings, if you understand that whatever you have is going to slowly and silently erode due to inflation. That is, I think, the point. So I'm not advocating, and either is Danille, to invest in crypto or gold or real estate or stocks. I just simply want you to understand that if you think that working hard and saving money is going to make you wealthy, I'm telling you, just look at the last 100 years and you will see that it does not work.
So let's go to line number 3, which is you have to pay tax as a part of life.
Yeah. This is, again, a marketing campaign. Now, we do need tax. There's a lot of tax. A lot of people focus on income tax. You look at these presidential debates. Like I remember that classic line where Hillary and Trump are arguing over who's paying the most tax. But let's look at all the other taxes. Let's look at sales tax. Let's look at tax for transactions. Let's look at property tax. Let's look at all these things. Tax is a big component. And a lot of people pay a lot of tax already. There's rental tax, right? There's taxes all over the place.
Especially your high earners, like your low earners, they don't pay much tax. Those listening might not think it's a big deal. But those of you that make a lot of money, you understand that tax and tax strategy is a huge component.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that if everyone has to agree with this, that tax will be the most expense. The tax will be the biggest expense of your life. Okay, let me say that again. Tax will be the biggest expense of your life. And I think it's important that if you know that something is going to be the biggest expense of your life, then shouldn't you at least look at it? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, shouldn't you at least take a look at something that is going to be the biggest expense of your life?
Well, there's nothing you can do about it if you're in the theory like your parents probably were, where you just work, get a job, and retire, right? Like if you're not investing in assets, there's really nothing you can do about tax except pay it. But if you're going to invest in assets, there are things you can do.
I remember you telling me the story about you. So most of you might know that Danille went to school to become a school teacher. And I remember when you got that first paycheck and you're like, what? I can't live on this, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, because I was bartending in college and I didn't think I was making that much money, right? I thought I was doing all right, but it was all cash, So I take home cash every night, 100, 150 bucks a night. Well, then when I got my teaching job, they're like, well, you're going to make, 32 grand a year. And I'm like, that seems like a lot of money, And when I got my teaching paycheck, it was less than I was making working at the bar after the tax on my income.
Right. right. I heard a joke that said the Eiffel Tower is what the Empire State Building is after tax. That was
So
a pretty
bad.
good visual. Like, it's interesting though. Like people don't realize from I don't know what your take home was, but let's say your gross pay was 32 grand. Now this is a long time ago, guys.
Yeah, but teachers in Arizona don't really make much more
That's a
than that
good
now.
point. So what do you think your take home was? Maybe
I
in the
mean,
20s, in the low 20s?
yeah, in the 20s.
Okay. Okay, so that's a big difference, and that's actually what we're talking about. That's tax, guys. That's not, that's not tax that, you're filing it, on your, with the IRS or anything, and you have to pay or anything like that. That's not sales tax. That's not property tax. That's tax from a paycheck. And so, again, tax is the biggest expense of your life. And so, if you guys know that, then you should be paying attention to how do you reduce your tax legally? That is the question you should be asking yourself. And there are ways.
Well, the biggest one's through real estate. And I think that people don't really understand that, and they definitely don't take advantage of it.
Well, there's obviously depreciation, 1031 exchanges, installment sales, there's cost segregation. There's a whole bunch of stuff around real estate. The government lets you write off part of your mortgage, right? Because you own real estate as a single family homeowner. Of course, on your retirement accounts, what they do is as you're working your butt off, they give you these pre-tax 401ks and IRAs for deferrals, a Roth tax-free. There's all kinds of products out there to try to get you guys into on this tax deferral, right? That's really what they are, tax deferral. Even on a real estate, it's tax deferral. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep what you earn legally.
Well, and I was telling my brother, Trump has, they just passed this opportunity, or not opportunity, but bonus depreciations. And I was explaining to him that if I understand the tax code right, that any kind of improvement you make when you buy a house this year, you can write off directly against your taxes, which he didn't know. And he was super interested in because it's like, you know, when you're in a certain tax bracket, you might need to make $30,000 less to be in a different tax bracket. So it's
Sure.
not just saving that one thing, but if you can put 30 grand into a home and get into a different tax bracket, it's free money.
That is a really, really good point. Yeah. And so these are, I like what you say here is that these aren't necessarily loopholes, right, guys? They're not. These are intentional incentives to push money toward things, right? We've seen this in oil and gas. We've seen this in solar. We've seen this in affordable housing. There's all kinds of ways, right? And I know some of you might be sitting there going, well, I don't have the money to invest in these things. I get it. I totally get that. But as somebody who pays a lot of tax, you should be scratching your head and go deep on this. Go down the rabbit holes and try to figure out ways that you can legally earn more out of your paycheck, right? And I think there are also other simple ways. Right now there's this kind of disruption going on with employees, right? They're being replaced by AI, right? So I know a number of them. We could be talking about whether it's a marketing job or whatever. Well, these coders or programmers or whatever they are, and they're used to making these. I'll call them W-2, kind of like what Dina was talking about with a paycheck. But you can actually go out and create your own entity, have a consulting agreement, charge a flat fee, and then now you can start to write things off, like your car and your, maybe home office and, and client lunches and things like that. So there's all these things that you have at your disposal that people do now, right now. Now, this does change from administration to administration, so you got to make sure that you're doing things legally. But the reality is there's a tremendous amount of tax incentives and intentional incentives to direct money into places, and if you don't know that, then that's on you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's move in. You love it when I say absolutely. Let's move into lie number 4, which is buying a home is risky if prices drop.
Yeah. Now, I I get this, like, but a home is not a stock. And so there's a couple ways to look at this. First of all, this has happened to me as an investor and as a homeowner. So that story I was talking about where I built that house, that was 2007, 8, something like that, right? I built this house at arguably one of the peaks, right? Like, the great financial crisis was, it's arguable about what time frame that was, but we'll just call it 2007, 2008. That home went down. But guess what? It was a home where I raised my kids. I knew what my mortgage payment was. I could cover it. It was fine. I wasn't looking at it as a savings or an ATM. I wasn't looking at it that way. I was looking at it as a place I was going to raise my family. Same thing. Now let's go over to some of the investment stuff. Same thing. I was buying investment property during that time. I specifically remember I bought a 230 unit building in Austin, Texas in 2005, 2006-ish, somewhere in there. And then in 2008, it was a lot less, right? So again, equity gone, but still cash flowed. So it's, so if you're trying to figure out what your net worth is based on equity on the short term, you're going to get super frustrated. Now, nobody wants to buy something that goes down. I get that. But, real estate is a long game, right? And for me, I knew I was going to raise the family in that house. And over a period, the inflation was going to make that thing go up. And by the way, it's gone up millions of dollars as a result of inflation. And same thing on my rental property. At some point, it's going to come back around. I'm going to have higher occupancy. I'm going to have rent growth. And I'm going to have all those things. And eventually, Ross and I held it during that period of time. It was a rough few years. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, but if you hold things long enough, like say, everyone tries to time the market. And the truth is if you, don't buy and prices go up, you might be priced out. If you buy and prices go down, as long as you hold it long enough, it's going to go back up, right? You're going to make money. The risk is when you have like a forced sale, right? When you have a job loss, you have a divorce, there's no reserves. And that's when, you get transferred and you can't rent out the property. You have to sell it. That's when, people get in a bind. And that's why we're really not seeing as many people in a bind right now is because properties at 4% interest rates are typically cash flowing on rent. So there's a lot of people that, got transferred for their job or want to upgrade their house, or there's some kind of what would be a forced sale is now they just turn it into a rental.
And I think, don't trust us completely, guys, but just go back and look. And where do people hold most of their wealth today? Just ask that one question. If your head's in the sand, then you're going to say it's in stocks. It's not true. It's in home ownership. That's it. Like most people, like my mom and my dad, my dad was a contractor, my mom was a hairdresser, but they had very little in savings, which is fine. They worked their butts off and raised 3 kids. But at the end of the day, my mom's net worth is all in the home that she paid off.
And so is my parents. I mean, they have $500,000 in net worth on their home, and they probably have another 200,000 in stocks or something.
Okay, and they're in their 60s and 70s, and so it's guys, like, this is not rocket science. Hopefully we're not telling you something that you don't know.
Well, I think people think, yeah, but when they bought a house, it was really cheap, and then houses went really expensive. So the houses now are so expensive. There's no way they're going to be $1 million when I retire.
Right. I mean, guys, like, this is a long game here we're playing, right? Let the do their thing. Don't get caught up in the news.
But I think this is an important thing to break down is because we look at, like, my parents bought their house for like $70,000. So I look, people nowadays look at them like, oh my God, your parents bought their house so cheap. Well, when my parents bought their house at $70,000, their parents were saying, I bought our house for $10,000. I can't believe you're paying $70,000. So when people now are buying a house for $600,000, when you go to retire, your kids are going to be like, I can't believe you bought that house for $600,000.
Right. And that is the point, guys. Like, you just can't see it. It's so clear now. Like, I'm old, right? You know what I mean? I can look back and actually see the patterns. At the time, by the way, I've been to your parents' house and it's flipping nice.
Mhm.
It's one of the nicest neighborhoods in the area, just outside of Cleveland, and they still own it. And at the time, it was a stretch for them. At the time, it was at the top of the market,
Mhm.
right? At
Yeah,
the
it
time,
was.
at
Mhm.
the time, and I think that's the point. Now, so I think you to your point, buying a home is risky if prices drop. Now, if you're trying to sell it a year later, you're right.
Yeah.
For sure, right? If you're but if you're playing the long game, right, and you're in an area that you like, and you're thinking from a long-term standpoint, which is probably this is the way you should be thinking. This is what my sister did, who was a bookkeeper, by the way, at a medical clinic in Everett, Washington, and she slowly, started buying these single-family houses and putting tenants in them over a period of time, and the tenants paid them off. And then when her and her husband retired, once again, the rentals that they had acquired over a long period of time, by the way, and they're not huge landlords, that's where their net worth was, in the millions of dollars, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that, you just have to look at it like a long-term thing. If you're planning on moving in for 3 years, if you don't know if you wanna stay in an area, if you feel like your job you might have to get a new job somewhere else, yeah, don't buy a house. It's not a time to do that. But if you're like, "We're gonna stay here for a long time," I
Yeah,
mean,
and
the
like
home prices eventually are going to go back up,
and
even if they go down.
and the strategy should be easily this simple. Buy the house, move in, move your family in, and then try not to sell it to buy the next one. Right? Throw a renter in there and then just slowly do that over a long period of time. Just slowly get money out of that. Call it the Wall Street grind, right? Like just slowly do this. You don't have to be a huge real estate investor. But instead of like this is what Danille did, because I remember when she bought her first house, that's about the time we met after you were thinking about
I have a
selling.
condo,
Yeah,
but
you were
I
thinking
was
about
buying my
selling.
second house.
Yeah, and she's like, "I need to sell my condo to buy my second house." I said, "Well, why don't you consider you putting a line of credit against it, buying this other house, and then throwing a renter in there to pay the line of credit, right?"
Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Yep, and it was a stretch for me.
It was a stretch at
Mhm.
the time, and you had to this is big, though, she had to trust me. That's huge. But she did, and that by the way, that, uh, that condo almost doubled in price.
It did. Yep,
Sure.
I sold it for a lot more. I actually did just sell this condo a few months ago because I 1031'd it, and it sold for significantly more money than it would have sold for then, probably an extra 150 grand.
But the key is so the home doubled, and the tenant actually paid her line of credit off for the home she lived in, the one she actually bought next, and then you did it again.
Mhm.
So this is the point. So now she's sitting with how many do you have, like 4 or 5?
5.
5. She's got 5 homes that her goal is to pay them off, and she's sitting there with a pretty significant, net worth right now as a young woman, and, it's not because she started as a school teacher, guys. Like, this is something that anyone can do if you just put I'm gonna unlearn, relearn, and just put a different mindset around this stuff. It could be like my sister, it could be like Danielle. It doesn't have to be, this timing here. That's why buying a home is risky if the prices drop. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
because that condo that you just sold was actually worth a lot more 2 or 3 years ago.
It was. Yep,
And
I did
then
not sell at the height of the
yeah,
market.
which is okay. It's still doubled, right?
Because you can't time the market, right? Like, you can't I did not know 2 years ago was the height of the market. You can't time a market, and on what I 1031 it into, I had to be able to buy something, and so what I bought, I got a good deal on, which I would not have gotten 2 years ago. So, like, it all moves, and you can't this isn't a game. It's not like you're, trying to win and get the most money. You're not gambling in Vegas. You're just trying to make smart financial decisions.
That's right. Yeah. So and let's go to line number 5. Is a 401k is where you should be putting your money.
Ooh, this one might stir some feathers.
I know, guys. Like if you take a look at the reason for a 401k, it was never supposed to be a retirement vehicle, right? Just go look at the history here, and I think if you're an employee, I completely get it, especially when the employers do these matchings, right? But
Well, and the matchings aren't necessarily bad
nope.
to invest in what's matched.
Right. And it's a great way for an employer to keep you there because typically these have vestings where year 0 to 1, it's 0, and then 20%, 20%, 20%. By 6 years, you're fully vested, and the employee matches. So I do like that piece. But you oftentimes are very restricted on what you can do with your own money, right? And so just know, again, this is a way that Wall Street reaches into your pocket and says, we believe that we can invest your money better than you. That's all. All right. Now, I'm not actually saying you shouldn't do this as a strategy, because if you can do this, put enough away, get your employer to match it and all that kind of stuff, as long as you understand the strategy and you understand the fees and you understand where it's going to be, because like anything, a 401k is just a vehicle. And then inside of that 401k is actually what matters, right? So it's like, walking into a house, right? Like the 401k is the house, right? And then what's inside of that house? What is it? What are the investments inside of that house? And so you have to be looking at it that way. And so it's not the only way. And I would suggest that you have some money outside of what I would call the system.
Yeah.
The system would be Wall Street.
Right.
So if you have all of your money in Wall Street, then I think you're at risk, right? So let me give you an example. My brother and my sister-in-law, extremely bright, invested a lot of money through their government jobs into these type of retirement plans, and they're actually doing okay. But they also have real estate that they own and live in and vacation in outside of the system. That's all.
Yep.
Right? And so it's a balance, right? They're not all in one or all in the other, right? Does that make sense? So
Yeah, and I think too, initially when you're getting your career going and you're saving money, maybe it's just easier to put things in a 401k because it's kind of like set it and forget it, and you don't have to quote unquote worry about it. But as you start to get into your career and you start to accumulate more money, you're right. You need to diversify it because sometimes people think, my whole strategy is my 401k, and then they don't think about it and they just assume that when they retire, it'll be enough because they've done everything right.
Well, my good friend Andy Tanner wrote a good book called The 401 Chaos. And I think there's a few things that we should mention here. One, the 401ks or a lot of retirement plans have really, really high fees. The fund fees, they compound against you. You need to understand that. The second thing is there's what we would call the liquidity lockup, which is if you want your money for something. And by the way, as the employer, I've had to let people get their money. Of course, it's their money, right, out of the plan. There's penalties for early withdrawals, and these can be rather expensive. But and so that's ridiculous, in my opinion. Like they're actually penalizing you, one, where you can invest it, but two, for taking it out. And then, of course, that creates a future tax uncertainty, right? The betting on the bracket will be at lower taxes is not necessarily a great strategy. But and so I think the set it and forget it mindset is not necessarily good for anyone. You really need to be active in your finances, right? And you just need to understand it for what it is. That's all. And I think you just got to be careful to not have that as your game plan completely.
Absolutely. And, we hope we can help you guys with your financial education. It's a lot to take in, and sometimes it's hard to unlearn the things that we've always thought were true. But, it is good to be open-minded and to look at some of these other strategies because, everyone's around you is probably doing what you're doing, but you might not want to be like everyone around you. You might want to look to people that have done really well and see what they did to get there.
Well, I would even go out on a limb and say that if it's like anything, like the minute you step out of, the call it your comfort zone and say, I'm doing this, most people are good. The first thing they're going to say, that's risky, right? So just be prepared for that. And it could be, by the way, what you're planning on doing could be risky. But the point is, most people are creatures of habit. They're set it and forget it, and they're massively risk averse, which is okay. You just need to understand it. But if you can actually do things that benefit you on the long term, even 1 or 2% a year, it's going to be so significant in your lifetime.
Yep, absolutely. If you want to check out some more good content, you should check out our podcast last week on if Trump's housing plan is going to actually change the housing market.